As a matter of faith, whenever it is possible, I believe in refusing the binary and looking for a third way. I believe that God is creative. I believe in win-wins. And I believe that more goodness is possible than I can anticipate. You in this church have affirmed this belief for me time and time again. You have found third ways and shown me third ways, and you've stayed with each other long enough to see past seeming binaries and found shared values underneath time and time again. So I believed this when I came to this church, at least intellectually, but I believe it now in my body and soul. A few years ago, when I was at a retreat, we did an exercise called Soft Eyes. It both looked and sounded ridiculous. We were broken into sets of 3 people, and one of us at a time was asked to stand tall while the other 2 pulled as hard as they could on the arms of the person who was standing. But each of us also did this 3 different ways when we were the person standing. First, we fought as hard as we could against the pressure, and it was overwhelming. And then we just let go and let the pressure take us down, and it was demoralizing. But the third time, we let the pressure be without fighting it. And all of a sudden, the pressure felt like a good stretch. It was possible to withstand the pulling and stand tall indefinitely. We then compared that experience to staring as hard as we can, to glancing and looking away, and to looking but letting our eyes soften and see through whatever it was we were looking at. The third way, the soft eyes. This is a way of refusing all or nothing thinking and engaging in both and thinking. And this is important, more now than ever. We have learned that our society has been under attack for quite some time by foreign countries that want to destabilize us by fanning the flames of our cultural differences. And we've also learned that social media sites and our email providers, our phones and our web browsers are tracking our every move to try to understand us and our perspectives in order to make money off of us. And they've discovered that telling us things that make us angry and creating us versus them thinking, binaries, is really great for business. So there's this significant but mostly invisible pressure on us to enter into binaries and to disregard the humanity of the people on the other side. But our faith teaches us that our shared humanity, the sacredness of every person that derives directly from God, is definitional to who we are. We seek to connect, not to disconnect. We seek to understand, not to dismiss. We seek to love, not to hate. And this is countercultural work, and it's emotionally challenging work. And it's hard, maybe impossible, to be creative and find the third way when we are riddled with anxiety and anger. And it's hard to slow down and figure out what's really going on so that a new solution might emerge. When everything feels urgent. And 2, it is hard to care when so much of what is life-giving and wonderful about life isn't available right now. As I hear Luke telling us about the preaching of John the Baptist, though, I'm struck that in his shocking ways, he calls us to exactly this sort of work. John calls the ones who have come to hear him a brood of vipers, which was super insulting and not at all how polite people speak to one another. And it's a violent image because vipers are a danger to life. I notice that John the Baptist calls out 3 groups of people, and I'm sort of surprised by who they are. First, he calls out anyone wealthy enough to have more than enough. 2 coats, more food than they need. And I've got to admit that feels like a pretty low standard of wealth, which is proof that I have some wealth. But many people in that day and in ours weren't sufficiently clothed, and even more didn't have enough nourishment, don't. And so in that time, anyone with too much was seen as hoarding what others needed. Then he calls out tax collectors and soldiers, and that feels really weird. I mean, Jesus is going to do some work with tax collectors too, but both tax collectors and soldiers in an occupied state were part of the system of oppression that kept the poor in poverty and used their labor to enrich the already rich and powerful. And John the Baptist doesn't tell any of these people that they have to quit their jobs or change everything about their lives. He only tells them that they need to stop hurting other people. Take the 2 cloaks, give 1 away. Takes the extra food, give it away. Don't take more tax money than you have to, even if you're allowed to. And don't extort people or act out violently against them. Take what you have and let it be enough, even if other people are getting more. John the Baptist tells people to refuse to participate in oppression, which in essence is refusing to participate in violence, because violence takes a lot of forms, and one of them is keeping food from those who need it to live. This theme unites John the Baptist and the one he would baptize, Jesus. They created movements of people who refused to participate in violence. And their words and actions echo through the ages, asking us to do the same. What does refusing to participate in violence look like? Well, it is seemingly simple and difficult enough to engage us for our whole lives. Like faith. It may be faith. For some, it takes on the form of pacifism, but it also has to mean intentionality with words, those we use and those we don't. It means how we treat others in our household and our inner circle and our church family. At its best, it means speaking in I statements and taking responsibility for our emotions and thinking more than once before we pass along information that we don't know to be true. And it means not kicking people when they're down or up. It means paying attention to our buying habits and how people were treated when they made the things we buy. It means that if we're lucky enough to have investments, paying attention to them and considering which companies are engaging in violence. And under it all, and maybe most challenging of all, it means treating ourselves without violence, including the ways we speak to ourselves inside ourselves. And relatedly, it means disengaging from binaries, in finding deeper truths about people and groups and ways forward, finding middle ways. Of course, one big piece of not engaging in violence is engaging in compassion. Letting compassion take a bigger and bigger space within our lives. Learning how to be compassionate to ourselves and then letting that extend to others and then letting it expand even further. And I'm here to tell you that this is really, really hard. And I don't particularly enjoy it. My heart is more tender than it used to be. And the brokenness everywhere hurts me more than it used to. And it constantly threatens to overwhelm me. But that same exercise I told you about on soft eyes and letting pulling turn into stretching was at its core about standing in the tragic gap in between what is and what should be, and letting it break us open without letting it break us. Because there are at least 3 ways to respond to suffering around us. We can ignore it and push it away because it's too hard. But that doesn't change anything. We can let it in and let it break us. But that doesn't change anything either, except that there's more brokenness. Or we can let the brokenness break us open and be present to it without drowning in it. And this is what we aim for, although we are certain to fail both ways much of the time. But on this 3rd Sunday of Advent, I want to be sure to remind us about what helps us stay upright in the tragic gap, how we can be with brokenness without breaking and let compassion hurt, but not drown us. And there are 2 keys I know to this: God and joy, and they're related really deeply. So finding spiritual practices that can get you centered are imperative to lifelong kingdom building. They keep us upright, they keep us compassionate, and they tell us when it's time to take breaks. And they keep reminding us that there is also joy. We live in a beautiful and broken world. There is violence and wonder. An article I read in The Atlantic this week suggested thinking of things you used to do just because you liked them and figuring out what you liked about them in order to find out what you might like doing now, which was intended to apply to those of us who have forgotten how to play and have fun. Let joy in. Play and laugh and have fun, and if you possibly can, giggle. Fill yourself up. Because it is good in and of itself to enjoy life, and it is necessary to have joy in order to be able to do the work that we need to do to build the kingdom, so that the kingdom is a place of profound joy. We can't build joy if we don't know joy. So, dear ones, seek God and joy. They matter on their own, and they help us be compassionate and nonviolent. Thanks be to God for joy. Amen.